Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Prudent Observations. It's good to be back and doing these things again. I know that there's been a slight pause and delay, but I promise you that there's a lot of reasons for that, which we'll get into towards the announcement section. And then our plans for today are going to be a nice 1 hour lecture, 30 minutes for announcements, questions, super chats, and the like. And then we're going to get straight into it. So we're going to open up my lovely presentation that I have set up for you all here. And that, as I've said before in the past, I really want to ensure that whatever I talk about with you guys, it is going to be an hour-long, well-researched lecture, that we're not reacting to the news, and that we're not going to just ramble on and try and pull things out of our butts. So we'd like to have quality, well-researched, hour-long lectures that can help provide not only a basic introduction to just what on earth is going on in the world, but also for us to have a greater understanding of how the world actually works with respects to geopolitics. So as you can tell with today's lecture, we're going to return back to that wonderful issue of the United States, China, and Taiwan, and we're going to be talking about a concept known as the Davidson Window. So great power conflict and timelines is what we're really trying to aim for. Yes, Cyber Ninja Zero, no rank punditry here. That's why I'm a guest on other people's channels. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. Let's go get ahead and get started with an outline for today's lecture. So we're going to be talking about a variety of issues today. The Davidson Window is just one small aspect of what we'll be discussing today. This is sort of a broader outline with respects to USG, U.S. government policy towards China and Taiwan. I know that I have a large international audience, but for the sake of today's lecture, we will be focusing primarily on the American state, the government's perspective on this international issue. We will be continuing on with a series of these lectures in the oncoming future. One of them that I want to have next week is going to be on the Strait of Malacca. So we'll talk a little bit about that in today's lecture, but considering the economic importance of that strait in the Indo-Pacific region, I'll have a guest on soon on that issue. So anyways, for today's outline, we're going to be discussing who on earth this Admiral Davidson character is and the window that he outlines. We will also be taking a look at the relevant literature from the United States government and its intelligentsia. We'll be talking about Taiwan and its strategic importance alongside a little dash of Mr. Clausewitz. And of course, a history of the United States, the People's Republic of China, and of course, the issue of Taiwan and its relationships, going as far back to the the Taipei Communique and respects to Henry Kissinger, all the way to more recently with American delegations of congressmen visiting the island itself, alongside its international status and recognition, logistics, and great power competition, before finally wrapping up with the end of the lecture and then some really important news and announcements about sponsorship and such. But we're going to get started with today's lecture, and let's get into it, shall we? So, who and what is this Davidson and this window that we're talking about? As you can see from the thumbnail in today's lecture, as well as the lovely gentleman on the right here, probably like the least desiccated or overweight or paused officer that I've seen in an appropriate photo. But this is Admiral Philip Davidson, former chief of the United States Indo-Pacific Command. This window has been actually around for a while in this terms of discussion, because Admiral Davidson caught a lot of people's attention when he was at a hearing offering testimony for his proposed budgets to the United States Senate and the Senate Armed Services Committee in late February 2021. He had said some things that had definitely shook everyone's attention. So almost 2 years ago, then Admiral Philip Davidson, commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, had made what seemed to be an off-the-cuff remark at the end of the line of questioning during a Senate Armed Services Committee posture hearing. It took a while, of course, to notice all this. After all, outside of C-SPAN and of Capitol Hill nerds, who on earth is actually paying attention to this stuff? But he had said, with respects to China and making any sort of advance towards the island territory of Taiwan, or nation, depending on your perspective of it, he had said that I think the threat is manifest in this decade. In fact, in the next 6 years. Since then, everyone has kind of called this as the Davidson Window. Of course, pundits and politicians have referred to it. Now, I'm sure everyone and their mother has probably abused the term for geopolitical hot takes and such, but it what it means is the window of time between what the United States and her allies have to do to get ready in case the People's Liberation Army and its armed forces are capable of successfully invading and conquering Taiwan. Timelines, as we'll find out later in this lecture, are incredibly tricky. And I think everyone who's either worked in logistics planning or operational success, whether you're in the military or working in business for a merger or something like that, Lord knows that timelines are always difficult to plan. Uh, in fact, there are some within the American intelligentsia, whether it be in the Rand Corporation or more of the hawkish members of the United States House of Representatives, that the timeline may actually be sooner. And so we're going to be taking a look at what this timeline really means in respects to U.S. Strategic doctrine towards the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea and Taiwan. But at the same time, we're also going to take a look at America's strategic posture as well. This is the purpose of our discussion today. So, it's been a point of discussion and a ramble here. That's also why we're providing this lecture. But we're also talking about it 2 years and some change since he's discussed it, because I think that a lot has changed since he made this proposition. We've had the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, visit Taiwan in August of last year under the light of a new moon, or under the light of a full moon. Things could have happened like that. Although I remember when she had traveled, there was that lovely meme going around from Nancy Pelosi's campaign email, like, the plane has been shot down. We need to fundraise now for the Democrats. But we'll get into that in just a hot minute here. So the window, to just wrap up here, is that we are referring to explicitly the timeline in which the United States Armed Forces and its allies and its defense posture in the Indo-Pacific and by greater extent the South China Sea have to get ready in case there is to be an invasion. And this isn't in the backdrop of all of a sudden China is going to invade Taiwan. It has been a long discussed goal of the Chinese government to move forward on this issue. Now, at the same time, since he made these remarks, there had also been famous individuals that have worked in international relations for quite some time, including the now 100-year-old Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State. You're never too old to learn new things. He had said that Kissinger had believed that he doesn't think that they're going to invade within the current decade. So we're seeing already quite a bit of time frame differences between individuals that have been in government probably since ever and those that have worked in the armed forces. So we're going to take a look at this window today, but we're also going to take a look at sort of the history of U.S. foreign policy and the rest in this issue. So we're going to review some of the relevant literature that are out there today. I've done a small selection. Anyone who's done an actual literature review in an academic paper knows that as lengthy as your literature review will be, the section of your lit review that covers all your citations is about as long as the literature review itself. So this is not by any means an expansive or comprehensive review of the literature. If we were like that, the stream would be as long as Apostolic Majesty's streams. Not to insult him on that ends, but we aim for hour-long lectures here at Prudent Observations. So we're going to have various sources from the Institute of National Security Studies for the Center of American Renewal, and we will come back to the presentation very shortly. So we will actually take a start with an article here from the American Enterprise Institute. Let me get to some of the important parts that I thought were interesting here. This article is called Stress Testing American Grand Strategy 2. This is the second one that they have done from the Center of American Renewal. We'll share this tab instead. Critical Assumptions and Great Power Rivalry. This paper, of course, was published in April of 2023, so we've got some fresh lit to review, ladies and gents. It's always good to have some fresh stuff, but it's always good to review the literature and history of the particular subject that you're going over. So we're going to just review this little brief outline here and then discuss about defense planning guidance and where some of the issues that the AIE finds there. Again, we're looking at American intelligentsia. Some of you may disagree with these assumptions. There are outside sources to consider, and trust me, over the next few weeks, we will be reviewing outside and non-American critiques of these kinds of postures, so do not worry. So many of the assumptions have oriented American strategy since the end of the Cold War about its durability of U.S. military primacy, for example, or the degree of security and stability Washington could, except in Europe, were increasingly being tested, if not invalidated, by a more threatening global environment. The implication was that the United States would find it harder to achieve its objectives as more of these assumptions came under strain. 8 years later, there's a bipartisan consensus that the post-Cold War era is over. The past two presidents, one Republican, one Democrat, have argued that the world has entered a new era of fierce great power competition is the norm, in which great power war cannot be excluded. In a way, this proves the point of their earlier paper. Perhaps the most important objective of post-Cold War grand strategy is to avoid a renewal of intense great power rivalry by integrating potential challengers into the existing order while maintaining sufficient military advantage to deter them from overthrowing it. We will get into this subject later in the lecture when we talk about the concept of the pivot to Asia under the Obama administration. But we're going to take a look at some of these important critical assumptions here, because these are kind of important questions that you have to ask when testing or outlining a theory, especially when it comes to international relations, is if we have these axiomatic presuppositions that say great powers do X under Y circumstances, then we should be able to test them, or better yet, to take a look at the facts around us to see how true those are. So, for instance, one of the first assumptions, which I think is interesting here from this position paper, the United States should no longer seek to draw rival powers into an expanding cooperative global order. It should seek instead to strengthen a less than global order around them. For a quarter of a century after the Cold War, the United States sought to tame potential rivals through integration. It helped China and Russia gain access to a positive sum, broadly beneficial international order, even as it maintained military and geostrategic hedges against more disruptive behavior. The idea that was helping that China and Russia could become more economically open and successful would also over time make them more geopolitically satisfied and politically liberal. I think that we can safely say that that has not been the case. By 2015-2016, this idea had been validated with respect to Russia, which had twice invaded neighboring countries in 2008, in addition to its intervention in Syria and malign interference with the 2016 American presidential campaign. Again, this is from the AIE. The 2017 national security strategy thus proclaimed Beijing and Moscow were pursuing programs and revisionism that were antithetical to U.S. interests and values, which we're seeing play out right now on the world stage. But to continue on, this first order assumption will be overturned in the next 5 to 10 years. The strength of the U.S., the strength of the assumption seems to correlate strongly with the downward trends in U.S.-Russia and U.S.-China relationships, and neither of them seem likely to improve anytime soon. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, for instance, has induced many Americans and many Europeans to embrace a harder version of this assumption that would not have seemed likely even a year ago. Increased Chinese bellicosity towards the Western Pacific and Beijing's deepening support for Russia could have a similar effect. So we're already beginning to test some of these key assumptions in here and outlining the fact that things are not as jolly good as they were in, say, the year 2000 or even, say, 5 or 6 years ago in 2016 or 2015. Although it's odd to see people nostalgic for that era, both geopolitically and politically at home, but you kind of can't get behind it. Assumption 2. Great power rivalry has ideological and geopolitical components. Waging it requires a free world coalition that can constrain autocratic aggressors. This is the assumption that we've seen from a lot of individuals, ranging from Francis Fukuyama and the more liberally inclined argumentation from the United States. This is also where you sort of see the Turbo America argument kind of come to full strength. Is that, in less than the span of, say, 18 months, we have seen a significant strategic revitalization of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, something that in 2014 many had considered relatively dead prior to the events in Ukraine. You can see this in literature ranging from George Friedman even to John J. Mearsheimer. So sort of a liberal realist perspective all over the place are highlighting this. Additionally, we'll go right here. This is the part that I found interesting. Additionally, as Russia-China axis coheres into the coming years, it is entirely plausible that a fundamental cleavage in international affairs will indeed be dividing one of the world's most advanced democracies, led by the United States, cough, cough on democracy, that are mostly committed to defending the existing order, and Eurasian autocracies that seek to disrupt or destroy it. This intersects with the constant power transition theory, which we've covered back when Prudent Observations was known as the Sunday Stream, alongside the ongoing lists of papers that I've been reading about deglobalization. We covered it a few months back with Semiagog on as a guest to discuss deglobalization, but I think it is also important for us to remember that this would also mean a more stratified global economy with a much more various fractures and lines of international trade and such. So, for instance, the United States enjoys a hearty economic relationship with Australia, not because of its Five Eyes or its Anglo connection, although that cannot be dismissed at all, but also because of rare earth mineral deposits that are inside there that are mined and imported from Australia. At the same time, right, because of international sanctions regimes and the need for China to have and continue its import economy, where do you invest in? You invest in areas like the Lithium Triangle in South America. So you can already see these sort of clashes of civilizations emerge through economic bylines that will exist here. So the existing order may indeed fracture, and there are even individuals like Peter Zeihan, whom you guys have been telling me to read since I started this channel. I am reading him. We will review a book of his actually very soon. So these are the kind of important aspects of literature that I think are rather important. But we're going to move down a little further in here. I had a section on China that I really wanted to get to. And there we go. We'll just scroll. Where is it? Delightfully found here. Assumption 17. The U.S. political system can produce policies necessary to thrive in an era of great power competition. The distinction between foreign and domestic concerns has always been artificial, and every administration has believed that strength abroad is inextricably linked to the strength at home. Beginning with President Obama's 2010 national security strategy, however, administrations become increasingly vocal and explicit about describing the once banal priority of building up a at home to better prepare it for challenges abroad. This is the one thing that I will always agree with the former Council of Foreign Relations President Richard Haass about. He wrote a great book in 2014 called Foreign Policy Begins at Home, and it offered, albeit liberally, a rather clear-cut and distinct perspective that you literally cannot have foreign policy without providing a sense of power projection at home. This means reshoring domestic affairs, getting your fiscal house in order, things that this administration is not doing, although it is moving towards reshoring, and we'll get into that later in the lecture. Although we're currently having this administration test whether the 14th Amendment's clause on public debt and the American debt ever being questioned would stand up in a court of law. So we've got that going for us in this respects as well. But also we need to consider some papers that have also been written from the National Institute for National Security Studies, which I will begin to share this tab as well. So we'll share this one. This was published also back in April of 2023, and we're going to break in about the aspect that China is preparing for a quote-unquote long struggle. Because as the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party was held in October of 2022. At that gathering, which takes place every 5 years, Xi was appointed to a third term as General Secretary of the CCP and Chairman of the Central Military Commission. Since the 1980s, every 5 years, the CCP has introduced widespread reforms in the structure of the party state. Previous reforms included changes of balance of power between the party and the state in ways that conform to the incoming leadership's priorities and vision, as well as domestic and foreign developments. This year, the MPC approved significant changes in the party-state structure, continuing the trend in which the CCP, under Xi, has been swallowing up the government, with lines between the two becoming increasingly blurred. This has been outlined, actually, since he took his, presidency or premiership back several years ago now. You can find, I remember distinctly, I have a copy of it over here, actually. It's this huge, giant paperback, like several hundred pages, of an English translation version of what Xi Jinping wants to do with China back in like 2015. It's a hefty read, and I need to review it on here because not much has really changed since then. I had bought it for a college class. But as a matter of fact, an examination of Xi's writings reveals that even early in his political life, he saw the West and the United States in particular through a Cold War prism. However, it was the trade war waged by the Trump administration, which later escalated into a comprehensive technological and geopolitical war that reinforced him for the need of economic and technological independence. The Biden administration went further in its efforts to prevent China from gaining access to critical technology, and unlike its predecessor, has been successful in securing allies' support. You see this primarily with the U.S. CHIPS Act and its efforts to shore up and get investments with semiconductor prefabrication plants here in the U.S. Let's see here. Chinese countermeasures can be found in its most recent reforms, which include the increasing powers of the Ministry of Science and Technology through the establishment of a new decision-making body, the Central Science and Technology Commission, which is likely to be headed by Xi himself. Some of the ministry's specialized functions were transferred to the relevant government ministries as part of restructuring. The changes will now allow the ministry to focus on macro management of competition and innovation to foster local development of basic research, core technologies, and a solution to the problem of the bottleneck imposed by the West, such as restrictions on China's import of microchips and airplane engines. In addition, a new institution, the National Data Bureau, will be tasked with managing digital resources under the auspices of Chinese government's top macroeconomic management agency, the National Development and Reform Commission. So, this issue over Taiwan is just one small bit of what we're going to be experiencing in terms of greater power competition. The Trump administration is not the first person to kick it off, although the trade war really did put things into gear, because it was the first time really that we saw Chinese-American economic interdependence really be put into question. And that plays a very large role in how conflicts are likely to start and how they are to manage. And this is something that most people don't realize, but it certainly exists in this respect, that our trade expectations play a very large role in how we engage. And there's a great book on this that I've shilled on the channel before, but we will review it in full very soon. I'm slowly getting a hold of a PDF so I can disseminate it to you guys, but we're working on the scan. But these are things to keep in mind, that this is in the backdrop of a much larger, great power competition that has been going on for quite some time. And then last but not least, I wanted to go to find a little more of an older article. We're going to share this tab instead. This is from Asia Policy back in 2013 of July. Expanding contacts to enhance durability, a strategy for improving U.S.-China military-to-military relations. This is from Scott Harrell, who still works in the RAND Corporation. And the RAND Corp is not my favorite group of people right now, mainly just because one of their policymakers was tweeting about Confederate monuments and names for military bases being torn down. But that's a talk for another time now, isn't it? So the main argument that he proposes is that U.S. and Chinese observers recognize that military-to-military leadership between the two countries is the weakest component of their bilateral relationship. Now, keep in mind, this is in 2013. This is in the midst of Obama's pivot to Asia and the Trans-Pacific Partnership talks happening in the background. Strategic mistrust between Washington and Beijing is high and centers primarily on defense issues. That still remains to be the case. Few analyses have systematically examined policy options for improving ties between the two militaries, looking for a wide array of opportunities for increasing contact and cooperation. And this study identifies a strategy for improving military relations, and it outlines and explores the risks and benefits of various policy options. So, one of these, of course, is that we have to incorporate is Chinese skepticism. I think this is from 2013, but that skepticism and distrust is at an all-time high, now more so than ever, because the posture between the two countries is innately confrontational and aggressive. Skepticism has expanded military relations exists on the Chinese side as well. Many PLA officers worry that the United States will convince Chinese leaders to order PLA to discuss operational capabilities or doctrinal concepts that will reveal weaknesses, negotiate limits on capabilities. The PLA views as useful, especially in the realms of cyberspace or outer space, or agree to the operational understandings that legitimize activities such as close-in maritime or airborne surveillance that the Chinese military sees as threatening. You saw this especially under the Obama administration and continued through the next two admins, Trump's and Biden's, on freedom of navigation operations, being accused by the Chinese as spying or for getting closer looks at what they're doing. Espionage accusations aside, there's probably some truth to that. Additionally, a broad segment of the PLA has been educated to believe that the United States is implacably hostile to China. Thus, if Washington wants closer military relations with the PLA, it must be seeking these as part of a plot to weaken China. And similar attitude that has been held in other regimes across the U.S. So that's just a short review for the literature. I will have those in the comments section. They will be a pinned comment with a link to all of their JSTOR links that you can download for free. If you have a Gmail account, you can access JSTOR, get 99 free articles a month without having to pay for them. It's a fantastic little service, which I use for my research. But we're back to the presentation now, and that's sort of the things that I thought were important for us to review, but do not worry. I'm not looking at chat at the current moment, so I hope things are still going strong on my end in respects to audio. And if you have any questions, by all means, there's the entropy link that is the pinned comment. It is also down below in the description for today's stream. If you want to send a super chat or questions like that, I answer those first, and then I catch up with the rest of you guys at the end of the lecture. So now that we're back, we've done our little reading. Thank you, Apostaya, for your great help there. We'll get back to the presentation. All right, so I think a little bit of history is kind of important for us to look at this, whether it's the conversation over the self-described century of humiliation, but also, as we talked about a few weeks back, we also have the background of the Boxer Rebellion, America's open door policy, and its position towards there. The term, of course, has arose since 1915 with the rising concept of Chinese nationalism opposing the 21 demands of the Japanese government, which one of these days we will also take a look in. And then subsequently, of course, popularizing its characterization inside the Chinese Communist Party as well as the Chinese Nationalist. So this at the same time can also be looked at more respectively in our conceptual history of the world, especially between 1839 to, say, 1949. You've got, of course, the Japanese and Western trade with opium, the Opium Wars, the first and second, treaties of Peking and Aigun with respects to ceding Outer Manchuria to Russia, the Sino-French War, British Sikhism, being inside of China itself, the ongoing Soviet issues inside of Xinjiang in 1934, Treaty of Versailles, the 21 demands, the British expedition to Tibet, a large concern about the idea that China was going to be the next rush for Africa in the 19th century, although this does come to a halt with the open door policy in the United States sort of forcing on this coalition-esque way of maintaining Chinese sovereignty under a weakened emperor and authority rather than enduring the Boxer Rebellion and what was to come up there. The Eight-Nation Alliance and the Boxer Protocol that would happen, imposing reparations on China itself that went far beyond its tax revenue capabilities. So that's something to also keep in mind. And then you, of course, have the Second World War, and where by 1949, Chiang Kai-shek has to leave and flee his way to Taiwan, where the Kuomintang still remains one of the dominant national political parties, movements, and identities inside of Taiwan itself, although there are more pro-sympathetic reunification and Chinese elements inside, not just that party, but also within that respect as well. But of course, most famously under the Nixon administration, we have our famous trip to Taiwan, or to China to open it up, sort of taking advantage of the Sino-Soviet split. But what you get more formalized in 1979 is sort of the transfer of America's diplomatic relationship, moving from Taiwan, i.e. Taipei, to Beijing, where we've been sort of recognizing, and you can find these on the National Security Archives. These are all more recently declassified documents, which are well worth your time to read, that we had sent from September 1970 to July 1971, the back channels in Henry Kissinger's secret trip. They were declassified back in 2002, but also the National Security Archive has them. So Zhou Enlai, expected, of course, to break formal ties with Taipei in condition of Sino-American diplomatic normalization. Didn't happen right away, as we know it happened in 1979. Although Kissinger has leadingly had said later in his life, after his time working with the Nixon administration, that Taiwan was not mentioned as often as it was, but the records will fully show that it was a heavy part of the issue, to which understanding America's political limitations at home, dealing with a staunch anti-communist bent even within Richard Nixon's own party, that, we would have to recognize that the issue of Taiwan would be an internal matter. Now, of course, ping-pong diplomacy has come a long way since it has been in the 1970s. The now 50 years later, we can definitely take a look at the fact that, Nixon's policy and, of course, the American position of distinctly identifying the Taiwanese being an internal Chinese matter that they couldn't identify. Even to this day, the United States does not formally recognize Taiwan as an independent country. There are 13 countries that do, actually 12 countries that do, 13 if you include the Holy See, with respects to papal interests in the region. More recently, it used to be 14, although Uruguay has been the nation that has seen the most pressure to change its position on recognizing Taiwan. And you saw this most especially during 2020 and 2021, as China has made substantial efforts to invest in South and Central America, to a point where those taking advantage of increased Chinese foreign direct investment would change their position on Uruguay, or Uruguay's government would change its position on recognition of Taiwan to do so. And we've covered this before on this channel when we talked about Chinese investment in the region, on its position of using vaccine diplomacy, foreign direct investment, and proposals for rail as well as other transportation infrastructure inside nations like Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Brazil. So, ways in which we can increase our relationship to the quote unquote global south, and a ways, of course, to also share information, security data, and more with, say, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, which has been headed by more nationalist-leaning, national left-leaning governments like that of AMLO in Mexico, and those that wish to break away from, say, the more American-centric Organization of American States, the sort of descendant of FDR's good neighbor policy towards the South and this Pan-American ideal. So we have those things to keep in mind in the backdrop of all of this. More recently, of course, there has been the position to liberalize that idea of liberal peace theory or capitalist peace theory, that the more we can open up a marketplace, the more likely we are to get ourselves in a position to liberalize the markets, liberalize the people, open them up. How well that really works in respects to state-operated enterprises, well, I think we've definitely seen the relationship there. There's that famous GIF that has gone around from 1980 to 2018 about the First Nation trading partner status and the growth of Chinese manufacturing, making them more likely ones to export goods rather than to be relying on America's industrialism. Something that has been a gross concern of most American, from everyone from labor unions to national security hawks. And you kind of see that rhetoric get blended with individuals like J.D. Vance of Ohio, the senator. So, the other thing that is important for us to take a look, of course, is Obama's pivot to Asia. This is actually, I think, if I were to think like a state, think like a government, I would definitely argue that Obama's pivot to Asia was probably one of the stronger parts of Obama's foreign policy, especially as a liberal. And that here, just I'm going to list some of the things that he has done in respects to his pivot to foreign policy that still play a major role in respects to not only Trump's administration, the election in 2024, but also here. So this includes lifting U.S. sanctions on Myanmar, increasing U.S. military ties with Vietnam, Australia, the Philippines, increasing humanitarian and military aid to Laos, contributing a warming relationships between South Korea and Japan, something which I think has been finally formalized with respects to the fact that, even despite concerns over comfort women and the Second World War, and of course Japan's, former imperial positions in respects to the Koreas, they kind of have been unified to some respect over the issue of Taiwan, or issue of Taiwan and China, seeing them as a greater threat and that they would need to work together on those issues, causing sort of a mutual diplomatic understanding despite what's currently going on. Alongside this, you also have things to consider with respects to using international economic means, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as a way to integrate China to do so. Although, of course, Trump would famously pull out of that, and with good reason. I think you can see a lot of people back then that were really adamantly against it, and I think for plenty of valid reasons. Of course, this includes countering nuclear proliferation in North Korea, defending freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, despite its issues. But even then, at the time, the former prime minister, or the prime minister at the time, but he's the former prime minister now, because Australia seems to be one of the few places that has a healthy democracy, which is, the argumentation of, China and Australia, although Australia goes through prime ministers all the time. Kevin Rudd had said that, that pivot to Asia had probably been the most appropriate thing because at the time, a realist view of international relations that in the context of the Great Recession, the U.S. moving towards here and trying to get a more revitalized investment in defense and security was vital to the region. So those things still play a large role today. And in fact, although it's only escalated since the Trump administration has decided to throw that out with respect to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, increase its trade war, and has now gotten quite a bit of the international community to sign on board, alongside the war in Ukraine has made it a lot easier to push this strategic balance and footing on both the Eastern European Eurasian front and alongside the East Asian South China Sea front. And of course, most famously, what we could only call the Taipei communique is just dead, is Nancy Pelosi's famous visit on August 2nd, if I have that on there on screen, right? August 2nd, 2022. For some reason, I keep thinking August 22, 2022. Alliteration's kind of a thing. More of a bolder approach in support of U.S. aims in the region, not to mention that the United States has had submarines in the area, not to mention that there has been multiple reports of U.S. advisors training the Taiwanese on the ground on this area. And this is, of course, in the backdrop of, every time that we see on the news or on Twitter of air defense identification zones being violated or, flying through Taiwanese airspace. I would remind the audience, of course, that the ADIZ, the Air Defense Identification Zone of Taiwan, does cover a significant portion of the Chinese mainland, not just the Strait of Taiwan between the two countries. But, since then, of course, both Republican and Democratic I don't want to say congregations, but I guess visitors or envoys have visited since then. Although this has caused significant political tension at home inside of Taiwan, which we will cover in a future lecture, although I would like to get someone who's either A, Taiwanese, or B, just be more researched on the subject before I get to talk about Taiwanese politics. And this is coming from someone who works inside American politics in his youth and still does intermittently, that I barely understand the politics of my own country. So let's not be talking about other individuals. But this kind of history is important for us to understand the CCP's skepticism, but also sort of the American interests in the region as well that date back really since America started formalizing its position of what we would call empire. And I'll be covering the concept of empire shortly on Substack in the coming weeks. All right, so strategic importance of Taiwan. I feel like the need to cite Clausewitz a little bit here, although I'm going to do it not as formally. 3 reasons why you go to war: honor, interests, survival. Those are sort of the reasons why you do it. Not much has really changed since the 19th century in respects to reasons to go to war, although there is, it's been more, I think, fleshed out since World War I, that there are such things as the alliance trap to keep in mind. We definitely see this when it comes to the issues of NATO or the CTSO and other respective organizations. Those are the reasons why you do it, right? And honor and interests, and to some extent survival, definitely go hand in hand with respects to Taiwan and the Taiwanese Strait, the South China Sea, and the East China Sea. So, economic centers in regards to a massive center of international trade. This comes from the Asia Times. Taiwan has become the world's 16th largest trading economy, with trade exceeding $800 billion. United States. One of those important things to keep in mind in that respect, that Taiwan is still a major international trading hub, and that we have to understand that. But also at the same time, that's the first time in Taiwanese history that has been the case. But also because its performance has been supported by the foundation of its industrial strengths. Taiwan has the advantage of having an ecosystem friendly to businesses and industrial cluster, allows for an effective industrial supply chain that is quick to respond to market changes. This is being cited now from the Center for Strategic International Studies. This makes it possible for the United States and the Taiwanese to enjoy a relationship of highly innovative and quality products. For instance, 80% of the global market share of laptops and motherboards and 60% of the world's network devices were manufactured by Taiwan. There's your interests right there. 80% of the global market share of laptops and motherboards, 60% of network devices are manufactured by Taiwan. Bicycle brands include Giant and Merida, are well known around the world. They're the 5th largest exporter of machine tools with a high cost to performance ratio. And also 70% of all functional textile and apparel comes from Taiwan. They manufacture brands such as Adidas, Nike, Lululemon, Under Armour, and of course, Taiwan's bubble tea is well known around the world. So this is just one part of the U.S. relationship that we have to keep in mind with its economic model and U.S. brand of consumer electronics. COVID-19, the ongoing war, sanctions, and of course the war in Ukraine disrupting the amount of semiconductor-grade neon that you can produce. There are two companies inside of Ukraine that have been sort of disrupted that produced roughly 50 to 60% of all of the world's semiconductor-grade neon has been put on hold, in part because of this. So, also the United States is working to, increase Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, which we will get into in a minute, to help set up fabrication plants there. So a U.S. brand can work inside of, with Taiwan to set up here, but also to set up over there as well. And of course, Taiwan's export to China, though, is also 42% of total export. But among that, more than 15% semiconductor exports. Taiwan's semiconductor export to China makes up 60% of full Taiwanese exports. So most of the majority of all kinds of electronic devices are made in China, and those, of course, need a lot of the semiconductors that are being made. And this is where you can also see the interests of the United States government being put into place with the USA CHIPS Act and various regulations that you can already look up on, on the CFR today that can be found with respects to the wonderful world of making sure that if you are a government appropriations official or that you are a purchasing agent, you cannot buy anything that has been made in China or has been exported out of China. So you can already see where some of these areas are going to get rough. But the TSMC, of course, has its own issues because there's been conversations with respects to war in Taiwan that if war were to happen or if a Chinese invasion were to happen, things are going to be difficult. So geopolitical uncertainty, of course, gets another layer of uncertainty. There was an article that came out just a few days ago, 4 days ago, in fact, on the 9th of this month, that said on Monday, Taiwan's Minister for National Defense, Chi Kuo-cheng, had made a statement about the nation's territorial integrity. According to Taiwan News, Taiwanese minister said that the island's armed forces would not tolerate any attempts to destroy the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company in an event of war with China. To continue on with the article, it says, on the topic of U.S. chip policy in China, Congressman Seth Moulton had recently told the political conference goers the U.S. should make it very clear to the Chinese that if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up the TSMC. Openly talking about these policies seems to be frowned upon in China, to be made clear by Defense Minister Chiu's statements in response to Taiwanese media questioning that Monday. The Taiwanese minister made it clear to reporters that armed forces are responsible for defending Taiwan, its armed forces, Taiwanese, and its people, materials, and strategic resources from any aggression, regardless of the source. If they want to bomb this and that, the armed forces will not tolerate it. And of course, Seth Moulton is a former Marine Corps and a member of the Democratic Party. But things that illustrate that this is not as clear-cut as we would like. But then, of course, you have hegemony and containment. Former U.S. historian, writer, and author John J. Eikenberry has famously coined that America's foreign policy since the end of 1945 has been what we would call liberal hegemony. I would argue it probably goes back much earlier, but then you get that awkward interpretation of what do we mean by liberal. But since the Second World War, more or less, it has been a hegemony of liberal hegemony to promote an openness and tolerating aspect of what we would call an American brand of liberalism, open markets, democracy, individual freedom, the right to individuals to move around, and of course to contain a rising power. This is where power transition theory and the subject of Taiwan kind of go hand in hand. If you are someone that is engaged in great power competition and you can see that someone is rising both in terms of its gross domestic product, has the capability to invest billions of dollars in foreign direct investment inside other countries, utilizing resource traps and the traps of debt to leverage other nations and say in sub-Saharan Africa or in Ethiopia or say Brazil, Argentina, Chile, exporting nations of highly important goods like rare earth minerals while enjoying a good relationship now with the Russians, whether that be for oil and natural gas deals. As we previously have explored on Prudent Observations, there is a hefty relationship between natural resource exporters like Russia and enjoying a relationship of cheap natural gas and oil like those countries like China and India, illustrates that you might want to contain them. This is a sort of the tragedy, dare I say, of great power politics, but also to contain them and incorporate them into an international system. Those are the ways and means in which this happens. So, those are the things to definitely keep in mind. So with that, we're going to move on. But those sort of Clausewitz's ideas of honor, interests, and whatnot. Honor, of course, can be anything regarding to saving face with respect to democracy, but also in part because you want your values to be the one winning here. It does seem like the USG is trying to aim for that cultural victory policy bit with respects to this game of civilization. So, of course, these are wonderful talking points that everyone said and their mother by pundits like to talk about, but I think it's important for us to take a look at. Great power competition, of course, seems to be a historical inevitability when we take a look at the concept of what great powers are, especially since the Renaissance period or Industrial Revolution, but they go back even earlier, prior to more European-dominated empires. You can see this in late antiquity, as well as in various histories of Asiatic wars between various Chinese empires, Korea, Japan, and other territories inside that region. In fact, one can only look at the various empires inside the subcontinent and understand that great power competition can be scaled down in such an area, with even though it has a large population. The unipolar moment was famously written by Charles Krauthammer back in 1990, talking about that there really was only one left, and that there would be some time for us to take advantage of that. More famously, although he's sort of just a pundit and talking head now, you rather famously back in, I think, 2008, Fareed Zakaria calling The Rise of the Rest, taking a look at the sort of components of what you would call neoliberalism, being, lifting millions, if not billions, of people out of abject poverty. The number of people in the world that live on less than $1 a day has significantly decreased over the last 50 years. However, these moments do allow challenges in the American system of global dominance and procession. This would mean that we would have to take a look at the aspect of how many of these large, and growing populations and industrializing societies can take advantage of the fact that countries can now enjoy forced projection. So, the United States, for instance, is going to be looking at the concept of ship-to-ship ratios. The PLA Navy has more than 355 ships. Some say that that's a growing concern in regards to its U.S. counterpart of its naval size. The U.S. Navy has already said that it would be contracting its fleet size and capacity in the next few years, all while its Chinese counterparts are rapidly expanding and modernizing. And of course, this comes from the South China Morning Post. Now, its analysis of shipbuilding plans in the 2023 financial year, the Congressional Budget Office did say that the U.S. Navy would shrink from its 292 Battle Force ships to around 250, with there being some significant time in between and its America's ability to produce ships. Jerry Hendricks had wrote in Closing the Davidson Window and Real Clear Defense earlier this year that the Biden defense budget seems to ignore the concept of the Davidson window. 17 bombers would be cut from the U.S. Air Force, 15 Navy Battle Force ships would be reduced, including 7 Ticonderoga-class cruisers, with no adding replacement bombers and only 8 new Battle Force ships, half of those falling within the logistics or auxiliary categories. The administration does justifiably trumpet its near-breaking investments in research and development of new advanced defense capabilities. The investments have long been needed. This includes areas ranging from battleships, cruisers, and hypersonic and unmanned weapons. So you're in this weird political environment where perhaps these things could be challenged, but that window that exists is now up in the air in respects to its questionability. And then, of course, resource dependency and supply chains are always going to be subject to stress test and the interpretation by one Dr. Dale C. Copeland about the expectation of trade relations. And of course, deglobalization, as we've previously discussed on the show with guests and lover of maps, Semiagog. But the logistics and trade. Geographically, of course, this is not limited to the South China Sea. The Strait of Malacca is very important for Chinese exports. This includes a significant amount of their trade when it comes to oil consumption, for instance. Imports are critical for China's imported oil from abroad makes up 75% of its entire oil consumption, which ultimately means roughly 60% of China's entire supply of oil passes through this 1.5 mile stretch. This comes from the insurer when it comes to respects of naval transportation and shipping. China is heavily reliant on this choke point, not only because of the energy resources imported through it, but also because of the massive volumes of manufactured goods that are exported through it. If the Strait of Malacca were to somehow be obstructed or blocked for a significant amount of time, China's entire economy and society would come under significant strain with huge implications for global geopolitics, the economy, trade, and credit. The Davidson Window does not just mean a tax on Taiwan, Taiwanese soil or its territorial sovereignty, but this would also more or less mean that, buttons are getting pressed and declarations of war are going to happen officially or unofficially. However, the ongoing trade war leaves trade expectations to be up in the air. Much of Trump's trade war has been carried over to this administration. And of course, this has come with some cost to the United States, of course, whether that's the Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, reviewing Section 301 tariffs, the USTR's trade representative, calling for an end to it. Some of this, of course, being phase ones and phase twos, reviewing which kind of tariffs need to be done. An increase of $200 billion in China's imports from the United States. State-to-state purchase agreements, of course, some would say they don't have a logical basis in trade when they're driven by market forces. And this, of course, comes to the old-fashioned free market versus, protectionist arguments that you would see in various debate stages. But, of course, there's also giant budget deficits that the United States government faces, but ranging to large budgetary initiatives and investments alongside various tax cuts and shortfalls and Americans actually having tax revenues collected. So, of course, the Biden administration still wants a lot of the phase one purchase agreements and links of removal of tariffs to its fulfillments to still be honored by the Chinese. And this administration, in fact, has actually gotten quite a bit more to it. America's dependency on imported manufactured goods has readily increased from 23% just 20 years ago to 34% in 2022. And of course, the decline in China's share of U.S. imports of manufactured goods was offset by imports more from other countries, mainly Mexico and Vietnam. That's also coupled with the USMCA trade agreement. However, at the same time, the United States has to deal with things like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations recently having their own trade agreement with the Chinese, despite American efforts to court them and have summits hosted here instead. China's share of global manufacturing production, for instance, has continued to increase from 26% in 2017 to 31% in 2021. U.S. exports have totaled roughly around $1.5 trillion from 2017 to 2020, and then jumped during the pandemic, although we're still beginning to see things significantly contract. But this leads to a question of trade expectations. Economic Interdependence in War by Dale C. Copeland was originally written as a theory and understanding and to look at the liberal and realist arguments for why countries go to war with one another when it comes to trade. Realists have long argued that trade interdependency is likely to increase war likelihood or conflict likelihood because it means that the other nation has leverage over the other one and can significantly take advantage of logistical and economic shortcomings of the other party if they so need to in respects to national defense. Liberals have long argued, and I mean liberal in terms of the international relations community. I'm not really articulating on the grounds of whatever your definition of liberalism may be. That actually no, it increases trade relationships and that we should be appreciating what they are. However, in the Journal of International Security in 1996, Dale C. Copeland argued that actually no, it's our likelihood of trade expectation. It's not so much interdependency does it. It's actually going to be how we expect those expectations of trade to continue. So, for instance, he would, in Copeland's book, but also in his article in I think this came out in, I just said it, 1996. My brain is not here today. That's concerning. Expectations of future trade variable, along with the state's level of dependence. One can derive a consistent deductive theory of state decision-making showing the conditions under which high interdependence will lead to peace or to war. High interdependence can be peace-inducing, as liberals maintain, as long as states expect future trade levels to be high in the future. Positive expectations for future trade will lead to dependent states to assign a high expected value to continuation of peaceful trade, making war less an appealing option. If, however, a highly dependent state expects future trade to be low due to the policy decisions of the other side, then realists are likely to be correct. The state will attach a low or even negative expected value of continued peace without trade, making war an attractive alternative if its expected value is greater than peace. Moreover, since negative expected value of trade implies a long term decline in power, even if war is not profitable per se, it may be chosen as the lesser of two evils. You see why I cite him very often. These are very important things for us to consider in this respect. That is on page 14 of the PDF that you can find. And his book, which is fantastic, illustrates this concept throughout history, not just in the early modern era and the modern era, but also in antiquity as well. So, very important things for us to consider with respect to the likelihood of conflict. And of course, the share of U.S. imports, as we were discussing, those are things that are very important here. You can find the book. It's relatively affordable. I think you can get it up for like $20 paperback on Amazon. Highly recommend that you read it, especially for those that study economics. It's a good thing to associate the old Luttwak idea of geoeconomics to today's world. Things that are important for us to consider. But of course, we can prepare for war and hope for peace. It's called a tragedy of great power politics for a reason. Diplomatic efforts in reducing tensions in the region seem unlikely, despite the ongoing meetings between the two administrations inside both the Chinese and American government, and of course, envoys to Taiwan. The powers that be seem to treat this conflict, though, as fait accompli. This has been war-gamed by the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, and, of course, by the RAND Corporation. There's been some PDFs that have been sent my way by lovely fans and patrons saying that I think the RAND Corporation war-gamed it out 24 times. The USA came on top 23 of those instances, 18 of them coming at significant cost and likelihood of potential nuclear escalation. Many things, of course, are planned for, but that doesn't mean that they are inevitable. There are plans upon plans upon plans that are managed here, and that the understanding that pundits or researchers may have may not actually be equal to those on the ground or those that work in government or policy. For I do not have access to classified information. Even if I did, Lord knows I would not leak it. I like not being in prison. But at the same time, the ride never ends. And as long as these ongoing geopolitical issues stay at hand, you can bet your bottom dollar I will be reporting on them. But we do not know if it is fait accompli, and we do not know if the Davidson window will happen anytime soon. And if it does, well, we've got 4 years to find out in 2027, if not sooner. So, as we reach the end of today's lecture, the timeline I still think remains relatively uncertain as to when a conflict may take place between the United States and the People's Republic of China. The USG seems to be aiming for a domestic more reshoring of its industry. In the meantime, this especially can be seen with respects to prefabrication plants, although this does come with significant issues because as America attempts to reindustrialize, it realizes the manpower, brain power, and the industrial expertise that it once had is aging and not as present as it once was, leading to some issues and delays in getting prefab plants opened. The United States Navy was one of the few branches of the U.S. Armed Forces that made its recruitment goals in 2022 by just 42 personnel, whereas the United States Army was, of course, behind. Perhaps having a smaller, leaner Navy may actually work in its interest. There are those like Barry Posen in his 2018 book, Restraint, that would argue that that is the case. And of course, when we talk about Dale C. Copeland's book, all these economic theories of interdependence are being tested out in real time. So liberals, constructivists, realists, Marxists, all these forms of trade expectation theory, all these forms of economic interdependency are all being tested out in real time. And we're also seeing the sort of backup, ulterior idea, motivation that, hey, maybe things are not going to be nearly as bad as the world sort of deglobalizes and becomes more stratified. Also, the state of conflict likeliness, I think, will be heavily based upon the conflict outcome in Ukraine. We will continue to see as the Russians and Ukrainians that are backed primarily by Western powers, the United States included, will be going. And of course, we can continue to be gravely concerned that the U.S. Navy is using drag queens to recruit personnel for the United States Navy. So, but then again, I think that the Village People had a point when they said it's in the Navy, right? No offense to those who formerly served, but, rum and a word that starts with S made the British Navy go round. I'd imagine something similar makes the United States Navy go round. It seems to just be tradition. But that will be the end for today's lecture. Before we get to announcements and Frog of the Week, which I have at the end of every lecture on Prudent Observations, if you're new to the channel, I do want to discuss sort of a sponsorship / partnership that I have going on with our good friends over at New Founding. So I've had them on before, or I had a lovely interview with them. I've spoken to them more, and will fully declare it now that I'm what you would call a talent partnership with them. So for those that are wondering what New Founding is a organization that in business that provides capital investment, but also to have businesses that are not ideologically aligned with the left, employers and those who have company values ranging from conservative to Christian businesses and much larger businesses as well, from legal to land management to information technologies. So you're not working for someone whose values are antithetical to your own. This is for employers, job seekers, and investors. So if you own a business, if you are looking for talent, and if you are looking to find a new job, or you are wanting to invest in a project that actually is going to matter, i.e., say, more educational funding towards things like what we've seen in Florida, or simply to promote, say, schools that are not within the public school system where you're going to have the libs of TikTok report on them, this is the institution for you. If you were looking for an employer that is not woke, if you were looking for someone that is not going to get your butt fired simply because you like mean tweets, then this may be the opportunity for you. Work for those that are aligned with you and hire those that would turn against you. There is the link down below in the description. That is my affiliate link. So if you were to sign up with them, find a job, it's a great opportunity, and I get a small portion of that cut. But again, it only is dependent on job placement. If you want to know more about them, I highly recommend that you visit the link down below, but also to look up my conversation with the head of product, Santiago, who happens to be like the one waspy country club Republican guy running it, that can tell you more about it. I've been there twice. I've met with their CEO, Nate Fisher. I'd spoke with him in private on numerous occasions. The guy wants to win, and he recognizes that if you want actual parallel institutions, you need to have people that are willing to hire you, and you need to have the money in order to start hiring people. So if you are looking for investment, if you are looking for a new job, I highly recommend that you guys check these people out, because they want to actually do something that makes a difference and not just point at the obvious and say decline. We're going to need things that are going to make sure that your family and you can be the breadwinners that you deserve to be, that you can start the kind of businesses that you want to be, and that you can win. So those are the things that I would endorse these people. I have partnered with them. And if you are looking for something here in America as an American, I can promise you that the process is anon-friendly, and that it's not just some algorithmic matchmaker. They've got 3 people that work there that will call you, talk to you, get to know you, see what employers would be interested in someone with your skill set. What are things that are listed on your resume that actually, or what are skills that are not listed on your resume that, may actually be beneficial for the jobs that are listed on there, and see what kind of their talent network can find you. So, I mean, if you're someone that works in a technical field, or if you're someone that works in an industry that is heavily progressive or long-housed, as they like to say, then this is the place for you. So that affiliate link is down below in the description. If you are interested, I highly recommend that you check them out. And of course, listen to my conversation with them. Having met them in their Dallas office on a few occasions now, I can recommend to you all that they're pretty serious, and that they want to win, and that security is what they're interested in. They do vet these people, so there's not a lot of infiltration going on. And you see these guys on Twitter quite often. They're good people. So with that out of the way, of course, some channel announcements and news. Sign up with New Founding today if you're interested in looking for work or to invest. My appearance on Restoring Order was just the other day. We were talking about Twitter, Tucker, and all sorts of fun stuff that was happening there, although that was just moments before we found out about the new CEO. And then we talked about Twitter some more on the Old Glory Club on that same issue. So I have a book review and an interview video coming out this week. The book review will probably go out on Substack, and then the interview will be out this week as well. I just have to edit the audio for it, and we should be good to go. It's a review of Andrew Isker and Andrew Torba's book, Christian Nationalism. And I had the great chance to meet Mr. Isker IRL and to have lunch with him and talk with him and chat for an hour. So it was a good time. You'll have my review on that coming out this week alongside the video. Keep an eye out with my appearance with Pete Quinones. It's probably be coming out sometime in the coming weeks. We got to talk about Ted Kaczynski, and it wasn't about, his rather infamous manifesto or the system's neatest trick. It was a reading and discussion on why industrial society is doomed to fail. So it's an interesting discussion on catabolic collapse, the collapse of complex systems, a lot of Joseph Tainter, a lot of sort of stuff there. Patron Book Club will resume next week on Saturday the 20th. We'll be reading and reviewing Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind. If you are a Substack channel member or Subscribestar supporter, you have access to all previous Patron Book Clubs, and we will be reviewing this book as well. And those are accessible to anyone who signs up on either of those ways. It just costs $2 a month to join in Based Book Club and other fun access to early videos and patron exclusive Q&As and what I like to call flipping through foreign affairs, where we read and react to various articles as well. I'm also very happy to announce, for those of you who have bought your Sealdings event tickets for the upcoming Nashville conference next month, I will be speaking at the U.S. event alongside individuals like Radical Liberation, Dave the Distributist, Charlemagne, and a few others. They will be speaking there as well. Orrin McIntyre will be there. So if you haven't had the chance to meet the Boomer Whisperer in person, you will then get the chance to do so then. With a lot of other fun stuff to come incorporated. But I just found out yesterday that I'll be speaking at that event, so I'm very happy to say that there will be a prepared speech this time. It will not be like last time, wherein I was moving down that way with respects to doing it impromptu. And then, of course, there'll be a patron exclusive video alongside some behind-the-scene drafts on future projects. I'm currently trying my hand again at some fiction writing, some vignette writing, and still working on numerous essays on things ranging from culture to film and whatnot. I'm trying to get some movie review stuff published with IM 1776. So by all means, stay tuned. And your ongoing support on Subscribestar, Buy Me a Coffee, the merchandise, whatever that you have the opportunity to, goes a long, long way. And I'm very grateful for it. So those are the announcements that I have for you all fine gents today. And then let's go get to Frog of the Week, shall we? Whoops. All right, Frog of the Week, ladies and gents. All right, so this week's Frog of the Week is the Strecker's Chorus Frog. This little fellow right there pictured is actually a picture of mine because I happen to live in the habitat area of where they are. They are a nocturnal tree frog native to the United States from Texas to Kansas to parts of Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas. You can see these lovely critters if you can find them. They tend to nestle in quite well and burrow when they need to, but they are a nocturnal tree frog native to the United States and North America. You will find them normally in grayish and brown colors. They are spotted. You can find the distinctively dark stripe through and underneath where its eyes are, as you can tell in this little photo. Of course, they will be found in freshwater areas and will mate in ponds, streams, lakes, and pools. So I've definitely seen a few of these guys at the pond where I fish at that you guys see on Real Talk. They usually have a white underbelly with an orange or yellow spots around their groin, but these are incredibly tiny fellas, although they've got a sort of elongated rounded triangular nose, and you can see them right there. Males, of course, have a large vocal sac underneath them, and the females are usually the bigger ones at 1.5 inches in length, whereas the males are smaller. As amphibians, like all sexually dimorphic species, it's usually the males that are smaller than the females, whereas with us, it's, of course, we have different physiology. But, of course, this is this week's Frog of the Week. I have a lovely patron who keeps track of these through a lovely spreadsheet, so I don't repeat myself. But it's always nice when I get to cover a frog that I actually find and get to take pictures of. So yeah, this is one of our lovely frogs of the week that we always end our lectures on, because no matter how dry, no matter how black pilling, no matter how dark the subject matter may be, there is always an amphibian friend telling you to not despair. But of course, now we get to catch up with chat and shilling, of course. So I wanted to thank our top tier patrons that donate $20 or more a month on Subscribestar, which include Fearless Leader, Preservatism, Raging Mandrill, Focron, User 4A5B5DB5, Consumer, Cowering Bugman, Hunger, Winston Fujimori, Flavanius, and Voluble Ox. If there's been one that is recently added on there, I apologize. I will double check Subscribestar to make sure your name is added on here. Your ongoing support makes the show possible and allows me to have the flexibility that I get to do with the things here. So channel memberships, buy me a coffee, Subscribestar merchandise, and things like that are always helpful. I'm working on getting a crypto wallet open because I've had 2 or 3 people email me asking about it. So most of my money's in like precious metals and commodities, but I will have that available for those that are interested. So your ongoing support is incredibly helpful in that regard. So let's go ahead and check entropy real quick and see if anything was added there first. And then we will go on and double check our lovely super chats. I love the fact that StreamYard now does the view count increases after Frog of the Week, as is tradition. So true. But all right, so Joshua BB for 199 says, how does India play in? Well, we will actually be doing a lecture on U.S.-India relations actually soon, Joshua. But in this respect, it's actually a little more tense because the United States has, under both the Trump administration and Biden, has had sort of a warming relationship, but also a distant one. Because, for instance, you have the respects of a lot of Indian armaments being bought from Russia. Well, at the same time, you have Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who had joined on with what we would call the Quad, right? So you have the United States, Australia, India, and Japan that are on board with this respects on how we can counter Chinese and increase this sort of democratic political bloc on the Indo-Pacific region. Not to mention that India's, of course, a lot of its power projection can come more closer to its south, towards the Pacific region, closer to the Strait of Malacca, which we'll be covering next week, actually, in its geographic importance. And then, yeah, it's certainly its own issue. So, but we will be covering U.S.-India relations in this respect very soon. I want to do a lot of coverage on this area because it seems to be the talking point of all around, but a more in-depth analysis will soon come, Joshua. Then so says the captain for 199 US, says China's hardly worse than the GAE, Z greater than Trudeau. I think it's always going to boil down to the devil you know versus the devil you don't. I, for one, I don't know how likely conflict is in respects to this, but I think that what we have seen, especially since the war has broken out between Russia and Ukraine, and by extension the West, has been that return to Cold War era third worldism and the issues of human rights violations being thrown against the U.S. accusations, which happened during the Cold War, happens now. I think that, that will be the case. And of course, not to mention that we're in a war of information, propaganda, psyops, all fun stuff. I hate my government, but I think I don't know how likely I would want to be ruled under China as well. But however, if you're a Canadian, don't worry, there's plenty of Chinese influence already inside your country as it is. Trudeau is already facilitating that. So, so says the captain. I'm not too sure. I'm not going to really pay too much attention to E-drama. I have like all 3 of those characters like muted in that respect. So I really don't bother too much. Prude's walks are him hiding the precious metals confirmed. No, it means that I just invest in things like, copper and other futures like that. I also have quite a bit of money in like steel companies and things like that. So that's just how it tends to be. But yeah, I mean, those are the things that I've got going forward. I want to double check entropy. Okay, good. And, we're set. But yes, it feels good to be back doing these. Like I've said before, I don't want to provide half-assed lectures or half-cocked anything. I want to ensure that you get an hour-long or as much of an hour-long length lecture that is well-researched, documented, that we can discuss. There's numerous issues on the Taiwanese question that we need to, I think, pay attention to. We've looked at sort of the USG's position on this issue. And then in the future, we're going to be taking a look at, of course, the future positions from, say, the Indian perspective, and then alongside the I know the Manifold podcast. I have been tuned into that Valtra for a hot minute. So he's someone's podcast that I listen to. I don't listen to a lot of our guys' stuff as much anymore. I've been trying to listen to things that are from subject matter experts, so things on like logistics and whatnot. So stuff like that, I think, is really important. I've been consuming less in general with respects to just trying to read more, because I don't want to offshore or outsource my moral or political opinion towards other individuals. So if I can read as much as I can, the better it can be for me. So, but yes, so those are the things that I've got going for you all next week. We'll be taking a look at a little bit of geography on China's imports and exports, especially when it comes to energy. I think the Strait of Malacca will be interesting. If Mr. Mandrill gets back to me from the text message I sent him, maybe he'll be coming on next week to join us. If not, I will find other like-minded but also well-read guests on the subject that can provide some resources and export, which is why like my channel email is always open. That you can send me information, links, things to consider. That stuff is always greatly appreciated, and that I'm always going to be open to people telling me, hey, you should consider this avenue, or you should look into this. So those are things that I'm always happy to hear about. But we're going to go to, as we conclude our, let's see here. Here we go. So we're going to get our end of lecture stuff going. And we're going to get to this real quick. So for those of you who are also new, does buying fishing weight counts as investing in lead? If so, I'm a millionaire. I mean, that's definitely true. I mean, I invest in lead in other ways, but yes, forbidden anthropologist, that's definitely a great way to invest. Good fishing equipment will last you a very long time if you know what you're doing. So yeah. Oh, all right. Well, as we get to the end of the lecture here, I tend to end with a reading from Scripture. So we will be reading from the Wisdom of Sirach. This is chapter 19, and we will be reading it in full. It's rather short. So, Sirach 19. A workman that is a drunkard shall not be rich, and he that cometh in small things shall fall little by little. Wine and women make wise men fall off, and shall rebuke the prudent. And he that joineth himself to harlots will be wicked. Rottenness and worms shall inherit him, and he shall be lifted up for a greater example, and his soul shall be taken away out of the number. He that is hasty to give credit is light of heart, and he shall be lessened, and he that sinneth against his own soul shall be despised. He that rejoiceth in iniquity shall be censured, and he that hath chastisement shall have less life, and he that hateth babbling will extinguish evil. He that sins against his own soul shall repent, and he that is delighted with wickedness shall be condemned. Rehearse not again a wicked and harsh word, and thou shalt not fare far worse. Thou wilt not tell thy mind to friend or foe, and there will be sin with thee, and disclose it not. For he will hearken to thee, and will watch thee, as if he were defending thy sin, he will hate thee, and so he will be with you always. Hast thou heard a word against thy neighbor? Let it die within thee, trusting that it will not burst from you. At the hearing of a word, the fool is in travail. As a woman groaning, it bringeth forth a child. As an arrow that sticketh to a man's thigh, so is a word in the heart of a fool. Reprove a friend, lest he may not have understood, and say, I did it not, or if he did, that he may do it no more. Reprove thy neighbor, for it may be he hath not said it, and if he had said it, that he may not say it again. Admonish thy friend, for there is often a fault committed. Believe not every word. There is one that slipped from the tongue, but not from his heart. For there is one who hath offended his tongue. Admonish thy neighbor before thou threaten him. And give place to those that are on the Most High, for the fear of God is all wisdom, and therein to fear God, and the disposition of the law is in all wisdom. But learning of wickedness is not wisdom, and the device of sinners is not prudence. There is subtle wickedness, the same is detestable, and there is a man that is foolish, wanting in wisdom. Better is a man that hath less wisdom, and wanteth understanding with the fear of God, than he that aboundeth in understanding, and transgresseth the law of the Most High. There is an exquisite subtlety, and the same is unjust. And there is one uttereth an exact word, telling the truth. There is one that humbles himself wickedly, and his interior is full of deceit. And there is one that has submitted himself exceedingly with great lowliness, and there is one that casteth down his countenance, and maketh it as he does not see which is unknown. And if he be hindered from sinning and wanting power, he shall find opportunity to do evil, he will do it. A man is known by his look, and a wise man, when thou meet him, is known by his countenance. The attire of the body and the laughter of the teeth and the gait of the man shows what he is. There is a lying rebuke in the anger of an injured man, and there is judgment that is not allowed to be good. And there is only one that holdeth his peace, and he who holds his peace is wise. and that's from the 1899 Douay Rheims American Standard version of the Wisdom of Sirach. I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your weekend. I will see you all when I have that video out and Substack out. Hopefully, I'm aiming for a Wednesday release on that, and then I will be live on Gio's channel for the Digital Archipelago. And I will see you all next Saturday. Be sure to spend time with your mothers tomorrow if you can. Give them a call. Tell them that you love them. If they're not with you, be sure to tend to their cemetery or wherever and pray for them. So I will see you all next time. We will cover more in the coming weeks and days. God bless and take care.